Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Ooh, hey guys, I'm back. You may notice I actually have a sweater on here. Today was predicted to be in the 50s, or lower 50s here, hence it being much warmer than it's been, because it's been in the 30s, but honestly, I can't tell the difference. My garage is not very well sealed. Behind the garage door, I still haven't figured out how to do this. Actually, the sides of that garage door are very much open, so the air is constantly seeping through there. So I guess when it was, in the 30s outside or the 40s or whatever, it was probably around 50 in here, maybe if I'm lucky. It was pretty cold. And so today when it was 50 outside, it was still 50 in here, so it really wasn't much of an improvement. However, we only have one more day later this week that's predicted to be quote-unquote warm, like 50. And then it's going to be in the 30s, and I don't think it's ever going to come out. So this may be the last video I get to do in here. Maybe there'll be one more after this. So I'm making this my kind of pre-Christmas or holiday special. I have, at the end of this, should everything go correct in terms of video editing, it's evening now, but I recorded earlier in the day some special bonus footage, and it's no fair. You can't fast forward to the end of the video because it'll ruin the whole surprise and all the action and excitement that comes with the bonus footage at the end of the video. So I'm going to do just some vinyl pulls, but two pieces of business. I was talking online back and forth to one of my regular buddies who asked if I knew what this strange, I forgot how he described it, like wooden, long tube log kind of thing is that made kind of like a rattling sound, or like the sound of falling rain. And I said, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's a rain stick. So I thought I would demonstrate, because I have more than one, I think, but this is my main one, the only one I can find, which is one I've actually used in my recordings. And anytime anybody has any questions like that, I'll happily answer them on video. But here it is. This was actually a gift given to me, and there's very sharp little things sticking outside, like small nails. So you have to be careful how you hold it. The other rain sticks I've seen didn't have this. I think what they do is they hold inside this little twirly thing, so that the inside is not completely hollow, and then there's these little pellets inside of there, and what they do is they make a sound like rainfall. If you tip it slightly, you get a very subtle rainfall, which is pretty much primarily what I use it for. And I don't think that the camera is going to really pick up the audio sound quality of this very well, but when you record it with professional microphones and you add a little reverb, it can sound very impressive. So here's the slight rainfall sound. I don't know if you can hear that. Do it from this side. So there's that. And then if you want a big loud rush sound, which you don't use too much because it can be a bit too intense, you can just pretty much do this. And you get a much louder rush. And for effects, you can also, this isn't going to sound like anything on this microphone, but while you're doing this, you can actually, I saw percussionists do this once, kind of hit this. Now, with reverb, it actually sounds very much, a very natural, woody kind of jungle sound or whatever. And I never thought of hitting it with a little stick like this. Not a drumstick. Drumsticks are too thick, a little thin stick. But it gives a very interesting sound to it just by striking it, even without the falling rain sound. But again, it has to be like kind of professionally recorded. So I'm going to do some vinyl pulls. The only other thing is I happen to be listening to a few oldies, a few obscure things this week where I was playing artists that I don't actually have a lot of albums by. Instead of, these guys that I've got 10 or 20 or 30 albums by, I was specifically looking at people I didn't have many things by that I hadn't played in a while. And I came across two Danny Gottlieb solo albums that were in my computer, but luckily I did find the CDs to show them. These are both from the late 80s, 87 and 89. And Danny Gottlieb is probably best known as the original drummer with the Pat Metheny Group. He played on the first three Pat Metheny Group albums, Pat Metheny Group, American Garage, and Off Ramp. And with Mark Egan, who is the original bass player of the Pat Metheny Group, once they both left Pat Metheny, they formed a group called Elements, and a very good kind of, I don't know, how to describe it quite, not quite fusion, but it certainly wasn't smooth jazz, somewhere, in between there. And that was a very good band with, bass drums, keyboards, and saxophone. For the most part, I think Bill Evans was the saxophone player, the young Bill Evans, the guy who's still around, not the piano player, and also keyboard player. So it was basically a quartet, a pretty good band. Most of their albums are a little, kind of went in and out of print, and they, I don't know why they stopped recording. They started recording Elements in the early 80s, and it looks like their last album was about 89, so for some reason they didn't survive beyond that, unfortunately. Maybe they'll get back together still, as all the four original members are still very much around. And both Mark Egan and Danny Gottlieb also at the same time were recording solo albums. Well, I decided to listen to one of these. See, I took my price sticker and I stuck it inside the cover. See, I bought this at Borders for $9.99. I used to love Borders. And I had forgotten the guests on here. Well, to me, the most interesting guest was John Abercrombie, who appears on this album. There's quite a few named jazz musicians on there, but this one has John Abercrombie. And Whirlwind, which was his next one, I believe it's his second solo album, and this one came out in 1989, is the only album that I know of that has both John Abercrombie on it and also the late, great Chuck Loeb, and I should say the late, great John Abercrombie as well. Now, in my mind, I've been kind of connecting those two guitarists, not because their styles are similar, though they're both talented jazz guitarists, but they both passed away within a few months of each other. And they both lived in upstate New York. And they were roughly in the same generation, roughly the same age. I think John Abercrombie was a bit older. But this is, and it's strange because I didn't know when I selected this to listen to, because I was listening to it in my computer, so I didn't have the musician credits on there. So I didn't know that Abercrombie and Chuck Loeb both played on this album. They don't play together, but it's interesting because the only album I know of were these two guitarists who I've been thinking a lot of recently because of their passing a few months ago. And it's one of those strange coincidences that I would just select to play this album, not knowing who was on it. And lately I have been thinking a lot about Chuck Loeb and John Abercrombie as well. I never knew that they both appeared on the same album together. Chuck Loeb plays on 2 tracks here, and John Abercrombie plays on, I think, 5. And there's various musicians on both of these Danny Gottlieb albums. It's not the same bunch of musicians track to track, it varies. But it's interesting, I've never known an album that had both Loeb and Abercrombie on it. And it's a little, you get a little reflective over the whole thing because now you've got 2 guys that I liked very much. and especially in the case of Abercrombie, somebody I've listened to for 40 years, that play on the same album, and a little bit out of their normal style. Well, certainly is the case for Abercrombie. The two Chuck Loeb pieces on here that Chuck plays on are much more in keeping with the kind of thing that Chuck did on his solo albums. But very interesting to come across this, totally forgetting who played on it, and just at random I decided to play it, and there it has, two guys that I've been kind of mourning the loss of for months now since they passed away. Strange, one of those strange coincidences that keep happening. Okay, so I'm just going to start selecting some vinyl now, because I've been yakking for a long time. And I hope you haven't forwarded to the end where the big bonus footage surprise. Well, what do you know, an ECM album? Well, I haven't really, I only grabbed a couple additional albums from the other room to stock up back here, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that there's more ECM here. This is a very big deal for me. Eberhard Weber's Colors, Little Movements. This was actually, this was the first Eberhard Weber album I ever bought. It's one of my favorites. I love it. It's my favorite album he made with the Colors Group, which had Charlie Mariano and Rainier Bruninghaus on keyboards, and on this album John Marshall was the drummer. And it was also the first time I'd ever heard John Marshall. Well, actually, the first time I heard Rainier Bruninghaus, and the first time I heard Charlie Mariano, because this was very early in my jazz education. I had discovered ECM through Bar Phillips' album, and because Terje Reptil played on the Bar Phillips album that I bought some Terje Reptil, and then on another Bar Phillips album, John Abercrombie had played on, so I bought John Abercrombie. So it started branching out from there. But this was one of the first ones that I bought that I didn't have any of the musicians, the first ECMs that I bought, where I didn't have or previously hear any of the four musicians in this band on another album before I bought it. It just looked interesting. And it was a new release at the time. $5.99 I paid for it. Unbelievable. And loved it right off the bat. This is the only of the three Eberhard Weber Colors album. This is the only one that has a track that wasn't written by Eberhard Weber on it. And that is one track called Bali, which is one of my favorites on the album, actually. That was written by keyboardist Rainier Bruninghaus. And I love this, piano and synthesizer with the bass and the drums and the sax, flutes. So in a way, it sounds like it could be a very standard jazz quartet, except you've got the electric synthesizers in with the, in the band and the quartet, as well as the piano. And Charlie Mariano always brought in something exotic. He didn't just play the saxophones, and in this case he's playing things like wood flutes, so it gives it an exotic edge. So there's a lot of nice colors in terms of sound on this album. And this is one of my favorite Eberhard Weber's, certainly my favorite of the Colors albums that he made. Recorded July 1980, which means it would have come out pretty late 1980 or early 1981, but I got this as a new release. And this was one of the few ECMs that I didn't buy based on hearing any of the four musicians on here on another ECM album. They were all new to me, and then I was hooked. And I think Fluid Russell was the second Eberhard Weber album I bought, but I could be wrong. I can remember buying this in another Discomat. This was another Discomat purchase. We're talking about the old, based in New York and New Jersey, record chain that was around here that was really good. They had a jazz section and kind of a new age section, which I don't know what they called back then. It wasn't called new age. They even had like an easy listening area, when they started. But that was the late 70s. So in a way, that genre was still kind of around a bit then. It's a lot of memories, I have, and I could just sit here and daydream for about 2 hours, thinking back and remembering and, you know, now we've lost Charlie Mariano and Eberhard Weber's not playing anymore. And Eberhard's wife, Maja, who did all of his album covers, is no longer with us either, sadly. Loved her covers. Okay, I'm going to pick out another one. These are really in there. What a surprise! It's an ECM album. What can I say? So, speaking of John Abercrombie, as I just was anyway, here he is. The Gateway Trio. This is their first album from 1975. Now, I had already bought their second album from 77. And I really dug that, and I bought this one. This was recorded March 75, and for anybody who doesn't know, John Abercrombie is the guitarist in Gateway, Dave Holland is the upright bass player, and Jack DeJohnette is the drummer. At this stage, I definitely had Gateway 2, so I would have heard Dave Holland from that. I don't know, I might have also heard him on other ECMs. I know I bought Gateway 2 fairly early in my discovery of jazz, but I had heard Abercrombie. I had other Abercrombie albums and DeJohnette as well by that time. People love this one like they love John Abercrombie's Timeless album, but to me, this is a lesser album, and mainly because it's 75. John Abercrombie still a little bit under the influence of the fusion scene that was going on at the time, and not quite as original in terms of the guitar tone that he would adopt. And this was actually one of his very first ECMs. You know, this is right in there, right around the same time as Timeless, which I think might have been just the album before this of John Abercrombie's as a leader. So the guitar is a little bit distorted, and to me the writing isn't as up there. It's more about the playing and the improvising than the pieces. But for me, Gateway 2 is better in terms of writing and the improvisations, and big chunks of Gateway 2 are just completely improvised on the spot, which is fascinating to listen to. So this is a good listen. I'm sure I have this on CD anyway, but it's not one that I put on the top of my list. I got this at Disco Man as well, and now this was $5.49, so which means I must have bought this before I bought this one here. I don't know. I must have. Very interesting. But a lot of people like Gateway because they like the first Gateway album specifically because it's a nice cover. By the way, done by Maja Weber, Eberhard Weber's wife, she didn't do a lot of album covers for ECM apart from the Eberhard Weber album covers. She only did a handful. And I didn't even realize this was her art until I looked at it, and I realized it's very much in her style. And looking in the back of it now, I see that that she did this cover as well. I know she did Bill Frisell's first solo album cover art, but she didn't do many others besides that apart from Eberhard Weber's. So I guess I'll dedicate this video to Maja Weber and her fantastic covers that she's done for albums over the years. These are in there really tight. What the hell is this? Oh. Now this goes, this kind of has the shrink wrap. I can't tell that the shrink wrap is kind of like missing on about a third of the cover. Keith Jarrett's. It's not an ECM, but it's an ECM artist. This I would have bought very late in the pre-CD era, only because it's Keith Jarrett not on ECM. And I bought a ton, maybe not everything, but a ton of Keith Jarrett's ECM recordings before I ever ventured to pick up his non-ECM albums. But this is one of his non-ECM albums, because he was working, well, this is MCA Impulse, which, yeah, I guess he recorded for MCA. I know he recorded for Atlantic, I think. And this has gotten a little bit yellowed over the years, even though I haven't pulled this out little insert that came with it. Yeah, MCA Impulse. I think it was one of those labels that were owned by a couple different companies over the years, and it's weird. I don't see how this happened, but not too many of the inner sleeves. You can see how that yellowed. How it yellowed in one of the corners, but not in most of it. Isn't that funny? This probably would have been a really good album, but and the thing that I quickly discovered is that I learned how great from day one the ECM recording engineers were when you compare an artist that recorded for ECM, even in the same setting, as that artist recording roughly at the same time on another label, what difference the records sounded, or how different they sounded. Now, this was his band, Keith's band. This was recorded in '74, so Keith was already recording for ECM. This is his band with Dewey Redman on saxophone, Charlie Hayden on bass, Paul Motion on drums. He's also got Sam Brown on guitar, who played on a couple of his early '70s albums, including the one he did with Gary Burton, and 2 additional percussionists. But the basic band with Dewey Redman on sax and Charlie Hayden on bass and Paul Motion on drums was a band that recorded for ECM. And if you compare this recording, which is Treasure Island, with some of the ECM recordings he did with basically the same band, this doesn't come out sounding that well, and I think it's because it's incredibly thin sounding. It's almost like something that's happened in more recent years. This was recorded in '74, but in more recent years, I think the newer bunch of younger engineers that come out of the technology schools to record music are so used to recording electric and electronic music that they have no idea how to record acoustic instruments. And I almost got that idea here. This is recorded in New York City, in a studio in New York City, in 1974. But at that point, probably most of the cities were recording pop and rock music and whatever, dance kind of music, whatever, but more electric instruments. Because I remember listening to this, I haven't heard it for ages, and thinking that, wow, this engineer doesn't, he doesn't know how to properly record an upright bass, for instance, or the saxophones sound too thin and dry. There's like no hint of reverb on there or something. So I've sampled a bunch of Jared albums that weren't on ECM from this time period, and literally all of them I found had that same issue. It's like, wow, they just didn't really know how to record. This band or the studios were not equipped to really get a good quality sound on acoustic instruments. Interesting. So let me pick one more. Now, you didn't skip ahead to the end with the exciting bonus footage yet, did you? I hope not. I should have selected from another area, and I went for one that was kind of sticking out because I knew it would be easy to grab. And much to my surprise and shock, I grabbed an ECM album, and one by an artist that I just did. And oddly enough, an album I've just been thinking about a lot the last couple days. So here we are with John Abercrombie again. This is his prime period. This is John Abercrombie Quartet, his first working band. It was the first time that he actually had a band that went out and did live gigs. His solo albums prior to this, like Timeless, were all bands and musicians that he gathered for the recording of that specific album, but not that he toured with. So at this point, and this was recorded in December 1978, how fitting. So you're talking, 40 years ago now, or 39 to be exact, to this month, this was recorded. This is one of my favorite albums by him. By 78, he really had his sound down. He kind of lost that rock edge of the fusion thing, discovered his own sound, which is later on you would hear very similar in the early Pat Metheny group albums, that very clean digital delay kind of guitar sound on electric guitar. But also, at this point, John Abercrombie had gotten his electric mandolin. and that really defines his sound. And I always go on about how great his electric mandolin is, but any albums that he recorded in this period from the late 70s to the early to mid 80s that had the electric mandolin on it, he really had his sound down, and he used to do this wonderful sound mix of the electric guitar using that really clean sound and the electric mandolin and sometimes even acoustic guitar, and it was just perfect. And this is how this particular quartet, which has Richie Byrock on piano, George Mraz on bass, and Peter Donald on drums, and it was my first introduction to all three of those musicians. They recorded 3 albums in a row, 78, 79, and 80. So for 3 years, all of John Abercrombie's solo releases were with these guys, and they could have done more as far as I'm concerned. All 3 albums, there's not like a duff track in any of them. They're all great, and just to show you how great all those albums are, over the years, my favorite album of the 3 has constantly continued to change. Sometimes it's the Abercrombie Quartet Untitled album from 1979. Sometimes it's Arcade, this one from 78, and sometimes it's the one from 1980 just called M. And it's still flipping around like that. This is certainly the most mellow, laid back, subdued, and impressionistic of all of the 3 of them. All 3 are worth having, and actually they finally, for years they hadn't been out on CD, and they reissued them in one of those ECM 3 CD sets. So, they're available. It's a little expensive, but it's cheaper than if you were to buy the album separately. And this is fantastic. It's short. It's just under 40 minutes. But this is one that, just when I see the cover, makes me want to hear the album. It's one of those albums. Very good, quiet stuff. Maybe not what you would expect, for a band that's essentially a jazz quartet with drums and bass and piano. No electric keyboards, just piano. So the only electric instrument aspect of it comes from Abercrombie's electric guitar and his electric mandolin. I don't believe he plays acoustic guitar in this one at all. But this is just fantastic. And as a matter of fact, Richie Byrock, the pianist, actually composed 3 of the 5 pieces on here, and John Abercrombie only 2 of them. So, this was a very kind of equally weighted group, certainly in terms of Richie Byrock's contribution. This is a fantastic album. Now, because I pulled it, I'm going to have to listen to it again. So, I've only gotten 4 discs down, but I had to do my little rain stick demonstration and leave some room for the exciting bonus footage that's coming up that I filmed earlier today, because I can't do these videos when it's not nighttime, and stupid me, because it's getting colder than it was even during the day in here now. But that's what I'm yapping about today for my pre-Christmas video. I'll do another one before Christmas. I'm sure it might be Christmas Eve or December 23rd or whenever. If it does get warm in here, I don't think that's going to happen. I'll do it here, but I may have to do it inside. Not much to look at there. And then, I don't know how to do vinyl pulls there, because I don't, I'm not taking that rack with me. That's, 1,000 pounds there, whatever it is. Okay, guys. Well, now onto the exciting, exclusive bonus content that I filmed earlier today, because I wanted to give you a Christmas present, and also respond to those who said that there's no real excitement in my videos. Well, here's the exciting part. I'll see you guys soon.